Good morning, Dr. Mden. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear
Okay, fine. Is the presentation clear?
you. Yes.
All right. Let's give it 2 minutes, then we'll get started in 2 minutes. Okay, welcome to this morning's presentation on this series of lectures on Python programming for scientists. So today will be our 7th lecture, and the first part of this lecture, which we're going to look at today, involves handling text files using the Python programming language. Okay, so the objectives for the day are as follows. So we'll show how to create a new text file. We'll show how to open an existing text file. We'll also show how to close an existing text file. We'll show how to read an entire text file at once. We'll also show how to read a text file line by line. Then we'll also show how to read multiple lines from a text file. Then we'll show how to update a text file. Then we'll try to show how you can do all these things you have done by using something called a context manager, which has got some advantages. It makes your code much shorter. Then last but not least, we'll also show how to store data structures like lists, tuples, dictionaries to file using a module called json. So the first part is basically for us to appreciate that there is a lot of information which is available for scientific use and also just general purpose use in the form of text files, just simple text file. The humble text file was there at the beginning and is still there and is still going very strong. Therefore, many programming languages, Python included, have provided functions and methods which you can use to create, to open, to close, read, write, update, and also save data to a text file. So the text file is still a very, very important way of storing data permanently. So once you store data to a file, you'll be able to access it later on, or you can transfer the same data to another computer, or you can share that same data you have saved with a file with your colleagues. Okay. Now to do all this, Python provides a function called open. Python is not the only function which is not the only language which provides an open function. There are other programming languages which do that. For example, C++ and C. The reason why the open thing is there is really because Python is built on other programming languages like C and C++. So those people who are familiar with C and C++, they will find certain things to be familiar. So what we use the open function for is for a number of things. We use the open function to create a new text file. We use the open function to open an existing text file for reading or for writing, for updating. How this particular same function is able to do this is because there is a mode with which this particular function opens. So you give this particular open function the name of the file you want to open or create through a parameter called file. Then you have to specify the mode or the reason why you're opening this particular file. Are you opening the file for creation? So you're trying to create a new text file. Are you opening the file so that you can read it? Are you opening the file so that you can write to it? Are you opening the file so that you can update that particular file? So that's where the mode comes in here. So the open function takes two parameters. There's a file parameter where you state what is the name of the file to be created or opened. There's also a mode parameter where you state the purpose for which you're trying to open the particular file. So the open function, as we're going to see, will take those two parameters. The mode, in this particular case, there are different types of modes. There is a mode for creating. If you want to create a file, then you can use the X symbol. So when you give the X symbol, then the open function will know that you want to create a file from scratch. If you want to write to a particular file, then you can give it W. Then if you want to update a particular file, you can give it A. Then if you want to open a file for reading, there's another mode which I've not included here, which is R for reading, like that. So in the case of us trying to create a new text file, the way it's going to work is that we'll start out with the open function here. Then this parameter here, file, we attach it to the name of the file we want to create. Then the parameter mode, we attach it with the access mode for which we want to, the purpose for which we want to create, we want to open the file, which is for creation. When this function runs, it is going to give you something called a file object, and that particular file object is going to be stored in this particular variable file object. Now this file object thing is going to be the connection between what you have in your program and the physical file which has been created on your disk. So there has to be a link so that when you carry out operations on this particular file object, those things you're trying to do through the file object will actually be happening on your actual file. So the first thing we have to do is to have a name of the file which we want to create. So in this particular case, the name of the file we want to create is something called the resistance.txt. So basically, this is a file which is going to contain data, science data for a first year experiment where a student measured the variation of resistance with length. So we know that resistance depends on length. So a first year student, one of our A-level students, collected this data, then we have it on file. So we want to actually store this data on file. So the name of the file, this is the name of the file, resistance.txt. We're going to store this string in the variable file name. So we run that. Well, let me just check if there's some people who have joined us online. Okay. All right. Then next, we try to create this particular file, resistance.txt, because right now this particular file does not exist. So the way we do that is we give this file name, which is stored in resistance.txt, which is stored in file name, we give it to this parameter, to the open function, which is this one here, through this parameter. So the file name, we want to connect the parameter file name to, file to the file name. Then the mode for which we are trying to, the reason why we are trying to open the file is for creation. So we set the mode to X. So when this particular function runs, it's going to create the file, and it will give us a file object. It will give us some result file object which we are going to store in this particular file object, and you'll see what this particular file object does. So that's basically you creating a file. Then if we give this file object to this function called dir, short for directory, we'll see that this particular function dir is going to give us the functions and attributes which are associated with this particular object you have created, and those are going to be stored in contents here. So if we do that, now when we print contents here, this is what we end up having. So this is what contents has now. So the content bit here, this is, as you can see, this is the list. It actually has the name of functions you can use with the file object. It also has some properties, for example, the name of the file which you have created, the reason why the file was opened, this one here, read, this is a function you use for reading a file. This is a function used for reading one line at a file. This is a function used for reading multiple lines. This is a function you use for writing things to a file, which are basically the things which we want to do in this particular case. There are other things, but we don't have enough time to do that. Here, this is an attribute or a property you use for checking if a file is open or not. So now that we have created our file, we haven't opened it. We just created it. It's there. Okay? So the next thing we need to do is to try to open this file. Okay, we know that it's an empty file because we haven't added anything to it. Yes.
I'm sorry. So when you run the previous one, you are just getting the contents here, right? Is it like the table of contents in a book, but it's not the actual data?
The contents we have here, these are the operations you can carry out with the file.
Okay.
Yeah. These are the kind of operations, because you have created a file. Then what kind of operations can you do to the file?
But inside that, the data is not there.
No, it's not there. There is no data. Yeah. So now that we have a file on our computer, now if you want to open this file for reading, we need to change the mode, and the mode needs to be changed to error. So this is going to tell Python to say, okay, there is a particular file I want to open, and the reason why I want to open it is for reading. So you have to change the mode to error here. Then this particular parameter file, you attach to the file in question, and you still use the open function. So the open function is also going to create a new connection again to the same file object in this particular case. And the kind of things you want to check when you open this particular file is you want to check, for example, if you want to check the name of the file, you want to check the reason why the file has been opened, or you want to check whether the file is closed or not, then you can use these attributes. And we're going to see how to use those attributes. So we have created a file. Now we want to open this file which is on disk. And the name of the name of the file is still resistance.txt. So we attach again file name to file. Then we set the mode to error. Then when we run this particular open function, it's going to give us a file object which we're going to store in this particular variable file object. Now we can now print the name of the file which you have opened. And the way you do that is to the print function, you give it the file object, then you put a dot, then followed by the name. This name which you have here is the name, one of these particular things which is in contents. This one here. Okay. So when you do that, when you print out file object.name, then this gives you the name of the text, which is the text file you've created, which is resistance.txt. You can also check the purpose for which the file has been opened. So in that particular case, you print out file object.mod. So this one is going to give you the reason why the particular file was being opened. And if you do that, it prints out error. So that's for reading. Then you can check if we actually succeeded in opening this particular file by checking this particular property closed. So this one, if the file is closed, it's going to give you true. And if the file is open, then it's going to give you false. So if you print out file object.closed, then this one gives you false. The reason why it's giving you false is because this particular file has been opened. It doesn't have anything, so there's no point reading. If you try to read it, we'll not be able to say anything. So now that we have seen how to open a file, the next thing you want to learn how to do is how to close a file. Now, for you to close a file, you have to use one of the contents which we have there, which is this one, close. And if you go back to the list of contents associated with file objects, there is this one here. That's close. We have used closed to check if the file is open or not. So when you use close on the other hand, literally cuts the connection between file objects and the actual file which we have on file. So there is always a connection between your file objects and the physical file you have created. That's how you'll be able to carry out operations through this particular file object. So if you run this particular operation, you say file object.close. Now this one is a function or a method. So you can see there's a difference between how we used closed. There is no parentheses at the end. Mode doesn't have any parentheses. Name doesn't have any parentheses, because these are properties of a file. So if you're trying to access a property of something, you don't have to add any parentheses. But if you are accessing a function, then you need to add some parentheses. And in this particular case, which is what you have here. So if you say file objects dot close, then this is going to cut the connection between file object and the resistance of txt file. Now if we check if the file has been closed, we say file object dot closed. Now what you're going to end up with, you're going to end up with a true. So now that shows that you have managed to close the file. So if you want to open a file for reading, that's what you do, and that's how we close it. So we need to add some information to our file in this particular place because our file still doesn't have anything. The way we are going to do that again is you're still going to use the open function, but this time around we're going to change the mode for which we're opening the function for writing purposes. So we change the mode, we set the mode to W. When you set the mode to W, this is going to allow us to access a function called write, which we can use for writing things to file. So in this particular case, again, we reestablish a connection between file objects because we cut the connection. So we reestablish a connection between file objects and our resistance.txt file. And the reason why we are trying to open the file is for writing purposes. So we set the mode to write. So when you run that, that's what we get. Then now we try to see if a connection has been established so that we can check the name of the file. If we check the name of the file now, between associated with file object, you see that file object is now associated with resistance.txt. So that shows you that a connection has been established between the file object and your file in question. So now what we are going to do, yes.
Someone is asking to.
Oh, okay. So the next thing, what you're going to do now is to write out the information we need to write to file. So the first line here, so how do we do that? We use a function called write. So you start out with file object, then you put a dot, then write, then inside the parenthesis of write, you put in the information you want to write to file. In this particular case, the information you want to write to file is the material which the student was working with, which is copper in this particular, say material, then copper, then this \n, basically that's equivalent of typing the enter key. Then what kind of, next line, what kind of quantities was he measuring? There is length in meters, then comma, resistance in ohms, then we end. Then what follows here is the data which the student collected, which is the length and the corresponding resistance for 0.2 and the corresponding resistance 0.3 and the corresponding resistance like that. So this data is going to be written out to file line by line. So when you run these lines like that, then it tells you, this bit basically tells you the size of your file is like 9 bytes. Then once you have written to file, we close the file because the purpose why I wanted to open the file was for writing, and if your writing is done, then you close the file. So file object would close like that. Then you can check if your file has indeed been closed, and it tells you this is true. So the next thing now we're going to do, since you have closed the file, the connection between file objects and the actual file has been terminated now. So we need to reopen the file for reading so that we can see the data which we have in the file. Now there are a number of ways you can read the file. Either you can read everything in a file at once, or you can read line by line, or you can collect all the lines and look at them at once using a for loop, and that's basically what you're going to do. So there are functions you can use for that. There's a read function, a read method. This one will allow us to read an entire file at once. Then there's a read line. This one will read one line at a time. Then there's a read lines, which is going to collect all the lines and put them in a list so that we can work with them. So how do we read an entire file at once? Okay. So the way to do this is to access the file object here, then on this file object carry out a read operation. This read operation is going to read everything which is this particular file, and once you get everything which is this particular file, we want to store the things which are in this particular file in contents, because these are the contents of the file now. So now it's not just the operations, now we are looking at the actual data which is in the file, so which are the contents in this particular case. So our file name here, then we open the file for reading purposes, so we set the mode to error, and we establish a connection between file object and resistance there. Okay. Now how do we do the reading? So here, file object dot read. So this is going to read the file at once. Then everything which is in the file is going to be stored in this variable contents. So if you want to see the contents now, you print out contents, and this gives you the information which was stored in that particular file, and that's how you do that. So this is how you read your file at once using the read function. Like that. So now that we have read everything in this particular file at once, then we can close the file using file object at close. That. Okay. Then you can check if the file has been closed, like that. Okay. The next thing, the other way to read a file is if you do this one line at a time. And of course, as we are going to see, it's not really recommended unless you just want to access maybe the first few lines of a file and not everything else. So in this particular case, you are going to access from this particular file object. On this particular file object, you're going to run a function. You're going to run a function called readLine. So this particular function readLine is going to read only, when it runs, it will only read one line, the first line from the file, and that first line from the file, which is going to be read, is going to be stored in a variable called line. Then thereafter, you can print out what line is. So here we reestablish a connection between file objects and our resistance.txt for reading purposes. So the first thing we do here is we want to read the first line in this particular file. So we're going to say file object dot read line. So this particular operation is going to retrieve the first line from the file, and that line which is going to be retrieved is going to be stored in this variable line. Then if you print out line in this particular case, then it gives us only this, which is the first line in our file, which is material, that line with copper there. If you carry out this same operation again, it's going to give us access to the, yes, Dr. John.
Why did you define that it is the first line?
That's how the function works.
That's a default.
Yes, it will look at when you use this particular function, every time you run it, it only collects one line from the file.
Okay, the
Yeah.
first line. So
you
you can randomly read like line 3 or line 4.
No. It will read one line at a time. To read the first line, the first time you do it, it read the first line. Then the second time you do it, it read the second line. Then the third time you do it, like that. So if you carry out this operation again here, it will now collect the second line. So file object will read line, then you print line. Now it accesses the second line, which is the length in meters and resistance in ohms. Then if you do it again for the third time, it will now access the third line, which is your actual measurement. So basically, as you can see, you have to do this over and over and over again if this is how you want to do it. It's a bit more tedious.
So you can't pinpoint to say the last line. You give instruction that is just to show you what is.
That's what I was also thinking. Is it any way to define the function line and line 1, line 2?
There is a way you can access a specific line, which is what we're going to, which is what you're going to come to the next bit here. So now, with what we have done, the first part, it reads the whole file, and it just gives it to you. This one reads one line at a time. But if you want to access a specific line, so what you do is you have to use a particular function called readLines, So this one is going to read all the lines, but it will not give them to you right away, like what read did, because read gave us everything at once. The other one, read line, was giving us one line at a time, and you have to repeat all over the place. But this one, read lines, is going to read all the lines at once, but it will not give them to you right away. It will store your lines in a list. So each line, the first line will be in a list, second line it will be in a list, like that. So each line is going to become a list element. And using a list, you are now able to access specific lines, whether you want to get only the first line or the last few lines, then you can do that. We have seen how to work with lists, so that is something which you can do. But what you're going to do in this particular case is to access, to look at everything in a for loop, and also we'll try to show that it's actually possible for you to access the last few lines when you've got a list. Okay, so in this particular case, we open the file using file objects for reading purposes, like that. Then we carry out this operation, file object dot read lines. Then this file object read lines is going to give us a list of lines, like that. Then if you print out lines, so what you get is actually now a list. So using this list, it's possible for you to access the first few lines, it's possible for you to access the last few lines, or it's possible for you to access a specific line which you want by using something called an index. If you check the data type of lines, it tells you that's a list, and you can do all the operations like slicing and everything else which we have done with lists before. So in this particular case, what we want to do is we want to go through this particular list lines using a for loop. Remember our last lecture on repetition, we looked at for loops. So now you can say, since it's a list, you can say for line in lines. So basically what this is saying is that pick one line from this list and put it there, then you print it there. So in that particular case, if you do that, then this prints out everything one line at a time. And since we are dealing with with a list, if you want to get the last 3 items here, or maybe the last 2 items here, you can use a slice. In that particular case, we can say print lines. Then if you want the last 2, you can say do that. So if you do that, this gives you this here. So you can already here, you have accessed only the last 2 list items, and with accessing only the last 2 items, or basically if I do the same for loop thing, so now that we have seen that if I do this part, this operation I've done here gives me only the last 2 items, right? So I can use that in a for loop and say for line in lines, then I say -2 and that, then I say print line. So if I say print line like that, something missing there, then I do that. If I do that, now you see that it only prints the last 2 lines. So this is us using something, this is a slice, us using something which has to do with lists. All the operations you can carry out on a list, you can carry out on this particular thing. So if you want to access a particular line, you can do that. If you want to access a certain bunch of lines, you can do that also. All right? Is that clear? Yeah. Any questions? People online? Okay. So now we can close this particular file. Okay. So the next thing we want to look at is, it's also possible you can use the same open function to add more information to a particular file. We already have the file resistance.txt. It has got some information there, but if you want to add more information without overwriting the existing information, then we have to change the mode in which we are opening the file to A, which is for appending or updating. So whatever you're going to write after you have decided to open a file for appending is going to be added at the end of the file in this particular case. So here we open the file resistance.txt for the purpose of updating. So you change the mode to A, which is for appending, and we establish a connection between file object and the file in question. Now, in this particular case, if we look at, we use our read lines so that we have a file objects. Okay. Oh, sorry. What did I do? No, I must have changed something.
Sorry, where is the resistance.txt?
It's on the computer. So here I need to let's read the following. Change this to. Read lines is for reading, but append is for writing. So I think I must have deleted something when I was editing. So write two lines to text file So you can see what this shows is that if you open a file for a particular purpose, then you try to do some other kind of operation, then it will refuse. Okay? So in this particular case, what I want to do is the following. So I want to write out, say, file object dot write. So I want to add certain things. The author, so that's me, who wrote the file. Then next I want to file object dot write. When was the file created? Created on 24th August 2022. So these are the two lines we want to add at the end without overwriting whatever is then. So if you run that, so that works out. Then the next thing I have to do is I need to close the file. I need to close the file. Okay. Then after closing the file, I need to reopen it for reading. Reopen file for reading so that we can see if the other things have been added. Yeah, because yesterday I was a bit confused about something. File object, open file name, mode, read. I think I should just do this in one cell. Then after that, I'll say lines file object dot read lines. Then for line in lines, I'll say print line. Then after that, close file object, close. Okay, so here read lines context file, then print out lines using for loop. For loop, then here close file. Close file. Okay. All right. So if I do this now, so here I open the file for reading. Say open text file for reading. So this part here we've seen, this is going to open the file for reading. Then this bit here is going to retrieve all the lines which are now in this particular file. Then we'll print out the lines using a for loop, then we'll close. So if you do this, then what you see is the material, the information which is already in the file is still there, which is the material, the length, this bit here, and two other lines have been added at the end, which is this one and that one there. So this is how you add or update a particular file in this particular case. Now, there is another thing which is called, you can do all these things and using a context manager, which is what you're going to see. But in this particular, the difference is that with everything we have been doing, we have had to close the file always, so that we have had to manually terminate the connection between the file variable and the actual file. But when you use a context manager, basically it's the same thing, but these things are done for you, especially the closing part is done for you. And basically, you can see that here, you see that there's a bit of a difference, but I'll explain what it is. Here, the name of our file is resistance.txt. Then we read the file that we have been doing before, but the arrangement is a bit different. So you start out with here. This is the context manager thing. Then the open function, so that you can open the file. Then the file you want to open, and the reason you want to open, then you say as file object. So basically, it's what you've been doing, but kind of reversed. So this is going to establish a connection between, so this line will establish a connection between file objects and this particular file. Then under this line, so you end with a colon here, so it looks like some kind of a loop. Then under here, you can now read out the contents of your file. Then you can print out the contents. Then you don't have to close, because the closing of the file is going to be done for you automatically. So in this particular case, if you do that, then you see that everything just gets done for you. You don't have to close the file, because the connection between the file is automatically cut when this structure comes to an end. So this is basically what is referred to as a context manager. So everything you've done, opening a file for reading or opening a file for writing and updating, you can still do it using this whole thing by just using, say, with, then as file object. So after the as, that's why you put your file object, then you end with a colon there, then the open function bit is going to be here, then all the other operations you want to carry out will come under here like that. Okay, so that's basically that bit there. The other thing you might want to do, if you recall when we started doing this thing, we started out with data containers like lists, also tuples and dictionaries and sets. Now, as much as those containers are useful, they are just like any other program, like a variable, because once your program cuts, if you have data and this data is in a list, a lot of data is in a list, then your program cuts, then that data is going to be lost. So if you have got data in a container, then you want to store that data to a file. There is a format in which you can do it, and there is a module for doing that, which is what is referred to as JSON here. This JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And JavaScript is a language which is used for web programming, but this particular format has been exported to other languages, and it's quite handy for doing that particular bit. So in the case of Python, you can access this particular format using a module called JSON, and you have to import it. So that's what you're going to do here. So we import JSON like that. Then we see what kind of operations you can carry out with this particular JSON module. That's what this part is doing here, so that you can look at the contents like that. Then if you print out the contents, then you can see that these are some of the things which you can do. Okay. In this particular case, what we want to do is to save data. That is called dumping. And also we want to, once we have saved the data to file, then we want to load it back, and that's what we're going to do like that. So the particular data structure we're going to create here, if you remember, when we looked at dictionaries, we had created a structure called weekdays. So this is basically a mapping of the day of the week, and the actual the day and the actual name of the week. So for one is mapped to Sunday, 2 is mapped to Monday, 3 is mapped to Tuesday, then 4 is mapped to Wednesday, then like that. So this is basically a dictionary, and if you print it out, that's what you have. Then you can check what you have there, then that's what you have there. Now we want to save this data structure weekdays to a file, and the name of the file, since we're using JSON, we're going to call it weekdays.json. That's what we want to do in this particular case. So that's the name of the file we want to create, to save our data structure to that. So we do that. Then we open, because we want to write our data structure weekdays to file. So which means we have to do the same open operation here. So we open our file, which is weekdays.json for writing purposes, and we create this file connection between this particular thing and that particular file there. So using the same open function. Now the way this is going to do is, so you do the following: json.dump, then the name of the data structure you want to save, which is weekdays, and the file to which you want to save it to. Remember, file object is now associated with weekdays. Here, this particular statement has created a connection between file object and weekdays. So if we say we want to save this data structure weekdays to file object, what we are actually going to be doing is we'll be saving weekdays to this particular file. So that's basically what this statement does. If we do that, now so that bit has happened. If I can open on the computer, you can see where is weekdays here. There's this particular file here, weekdays. If I open it, does it have anything? No, it's not showing anything. It's very nice. Okay. Let me.
Is it supposed to be a text file?
Some kind of a text file. Okay, let me. Now, since it's still connected to this. Let me see first. Let me say file objects. File objects. What's called? So now, how does it do? Okay, so here it is. So the problem was how I did things, because I did things manually and there was need to terminate the connection between the file object and the file. So the connection was still there. Okay. All right. So now you can see that our file weekdays.json now has that same information about our what is our data our stuff. Looks like it has been done twice. I think because I probably ran it twice. Okay. Next, I will need to reestablish a connection. I will need to reestablish a connection between file object because I closed the connection here. So I need to reestablish a connection between file object and that bit for purpose of reading, like that. The next, now that I've done that, now I read the file which is associated with file object, and whatever in this is in this particular file, I want to store it in days, like that. So I don't understand why extra data one line column. Okay, let me delete this and run it. I see. So here.
How are you?
Okay. All right. So you can see now that it runs, it gets the data which is stored in this particular bit and stores it back in days. So this is a way for you to store data which you have in a container into a file. So you don't have, so that if you need the data you have in a data structure next time, then you can just go and access it. It can be a list, it can be a tuple, it can be any data container you have. You can store it to file and you can pick it up from there. Okay, so we've come to the end of this the first part of our file handling. Next week we will have a lesson on also something similar to file handling, but basically how to manipulate files and folders, how to create folders, how to copy things, how to move things around your computer using Python. Okay, so that will be the second part of this series on handling files. So for this particular one, we have come to the end, unless people have got questions on what you have done today.
Maybe a quick one. When I came in, you were accessing lines using read line. So it appears you were going through the scripts bit by bit. I'm just wondering if you use that in a for loop, how it will be able to read the information in the file.
Which one? Which one was that? Read line?
Yes, read line, not read lines.
Read line, you can't use it in a for loop. It just reads one line at a time.
So you only use it like in a script?
Yeah. Like one line at a time. It reads one line, then it moves to the next line and waits for you to call out the read line again. Then it to do the same thing again.
Okay.
So you can actually use it in a for loop also.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you use it in a for loop, it will
continuously.
Yeah, it will also do the same thing which our thing did.
You have it down there.
So, reading a single line. So here,
The
So
four
if you-
is below.
just a minute. So if I do that, I've opened that, right? Then, if I create a for loop just here, just to demonstrate, I say, say I think, for line in, I think for object, objects dot read line. So every time this thing runs, we know that read lines get a line and it will put that particular line in here. So if I hope it works, then I say print line. So if I do, it seems to do something else. So it's accessing characters one by one.
Okay, anyway, maybe it's something we can
Oh, okay.
look at maybe when you start the next class or another time.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, we are at almost 11 hours.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the discourse. I don't know if there's anything more, any comment. Looks like we're done for today. Thank you very much, everyone. So, students, please encourage your friends. The world these days is about using your skills, and you can't really run away from computer programming or computer coding. So the area you have good hands on computer programming